going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. And today we are hopefully going to be preventing my new Wrangler from catching on fire and burning to the ground. Now what we're actually talking about is the Winch power and ground cable routing. This is something that I've seen messed up a lot of times working at the dealership on people's normally obviously aftermarket winch installs. Depending on where you've got the power and ground cable routed up through the engine bay, I've seen this, wadded up in the engine's belt, rubbing on the power steering pulley, cut through the power wire, grounding out on things, causing all kinds of issues. I've had a couple of Jeeps that have had failed power steering pumps due to the power wire rubbing through the pulley, shorting out into the power steering pump, just causing all kinds of issues. So this Jeep was optioned with the factory winch. So I was very interested to see how nicely or not the factory routed the power and ground wiring. And when I opened the hood day one, I was not impressed at all. So what we're going to be doing today is undoing the factory winch cable routing and routing it the way I like to route it. Now there's going to be a million different ways to route it. My way isn't the only way. You don't have to do it this way, but this is a way, or at least the way that I route it, that keeps it out of harm's way. It's not near moving components, and that's what we're trying to basically fix. This Jeep right here has the power wire rubbing on a bracket on the engine. Now the engine is moving as it drives and moves and idles, but the wiring attaches to the fixed body. So you've got a metal bracket sitting there cutting into the power wire. A winch wire is not fused, it is hooked directly to power. So the second we get through the insulation and have the power wire shorted out, we are going to make a lot of smoke and hopefully not a fire, but there's always the potential for a fire when you are talking about shorted power to ground. So we're going to hopefully prevent that today. Route the wire the way I like to route it, and hopefully you yourself, even if you don't have the factory winch option, if you bought your Jeep with a winch on it, or if you installed the winch, this would be a really good time to kind of double check your install and make sure it is where it needs to be and not touching anything bad. So starting off here at our winch, our wiring, like most winches, goes down and tucks over towards our passenger frame rail. Now guys, over the frame rail, they've got it looped down here with a power steering line, kind of looping low, which I don't really love, but that's not even the biggest issue. They then go from looping way down here and have it coming up, stuck and wedged between the battery box area and the engine. Now that wouldn't be a big issue. All of our pulleys and belts are up here in the front of the engine, and this is considerably further back. But if you guys look down here, this bracket right here with a nice sharp edge on it is literally cutting into our power wire. It's moved away right now, but you can see where the sheathing here on our big power wire is literally rubbing on that aluminum bracket right there. And then last but not least, they've got it just looped over and connected to the battery. But another thing that's kind of annoying here, it's kind of in the way of our dipstick. When you put the dipstick down, it is literally hitting the power wire. That's why do you have it like that, Chrysler? That looks really bad. I mean, the wire is literally being shoved to the side because of the dipstick tube. Yeah, to me that just looks sloppy. It looks messy. That does not look very professionally installed. So that's what we're going to be hopefully taking care of today. So guys, starting out, I'm going to get the air intake tube and air box assembly off the Jeep and out of the way, because we are going to be routing our wiring kind of up here behind or underneath the factory airbox. So you've just got to get the thing out of the way so you can actually run the wiring where it should be, or where I think it should be. Now this is pretty quick and easy. We've got a couple of 10mm bolts here. We've got a 8mm bolt or clamp, I guess, on the throttle body. We've got our breather hose here that you just push on the end of the clip. Now over here on the airbox, you do have the air intake temperature sensor that has two little plastic wiring holding clips. Now these things are really, really fragile and break really often if you try to get them off. So if you don't have any plans to change your intake setup and you don't want to break these, you can just leave these connected and just kind of lay the intake tube out of the way. Now guys, over to the airbox, we have a 10mm bolt here. And then on the bottom of the airbox, there are about 3 or 4 basically plastic pegs that go into rubber grommets. So you've got to kind of get up on this thing and be able to lift directly up to get those to unhook. So here are our grommets that are that came out with our airbox. These actually need to go back into their holes here in this lower bracket. Now guys, looking into our engine bay here, we can see that our winch cables, they've got drooped and ran up next to the engine, up the frame rail, and then just like we showed, just kind of coming up here by the battery. So we're going to get our winch wiring unhooked from the battery so we can basically undo all of the install here. And guys, now we're just going to be just unclipping the wiring. There's a couple places where it has little wiring holding clips, and get this thing out of the way of what we don't want it touching. Now that I've got this cabling at least loosened up enough where I could pull it up and see right here where we've got rub marks in the basically covering or the tubing here for the power wire, that's where it was rubbing on the aluminum bracket on that valve cover. So yes, right now it's not causing any issue at all. But guys, eventually that aluminum bracket would have worn through the plastic tubing and then worn through the insulation on the power wire, and then we would have a direct battery short to ground on our engine. And yeah, that's definitely not what you want when you are, multiple hours away off-roading or even just daily driving. That's never a good thing, and kind of shame on you, Jeep, for installing the wiring where it's just blatantly rubbing on a metal component. And it's not even like it was routed wrong. As you can see, there are very specific wiring clips. There's a few zip ties with little clips on it to hold the wiring into spots on the frame or body. So again, I think this is installed how Jeep is wanting to install these, but yeah, that is not going to work, guys. That's going to rub through and cause issues later on in life. Like I said, this Jeep only has 2,000 miles on it now, and we are already wearing into the tubing here, or the protection for that power wire. So give it a little more time and we will be all the way through into the wiring. All right, so I've got the wiring all pulled back all the way back to the winch. Now there were a handful of clips and zip tie pieces that basically held this in place along the way. But again, where I'm running this, we are not going to be able to reuse any of these. So I've cut all of their factory stuff off that again was holding it where we didn't even want the wiring, and then we are going to route this thing. Now this is going to be kind of hard to show. I will obviously talk through it here once it's installed. But what I like to do is off of our winch here, we are going to follow the frame rail and then almost immediately turn and tuck back behind this front body mount. From here, we are going to be in our wheel well area, but then right behind the wheel well, we are basically going to feed that wiring up into the engine compartment. From there, guys, we end up, like I said, up in the engine compartment, and then we've got a nice shot here into the battery box area. Whether you're going underneath this harness and bringing the wiring through this hole area, you've got a couple of different holes here that will pass you into the battery box area, and this is where our auxiliary switch wiring is. And then basically we end up with our wiring going to the battery. Now, yes, with the wiring on this other side, it would make it a pain to pull or replace the battery because you're going to need to unhook the power and ground for the winch so you can lay that out of the way to get the battery out. But at least it's not rubbing on our brackets, our dipstick tube, all of that mess here in the engine bay. Now I will show you guys my final kind of routing here, but what we end up with is the power and ground wire up here in our battery box area, kind of where our electrical wiring should be, not on the engine bay side of things. So up here into the engine bay, I again needed to remove a couple of more of the zip ties, and there was some electrical tape holding these two bundled together. Now yours is going to be different if you do not have the factory winch. If you are fixing your old install or somebody's previous install, you'll probably just end up with two loose cables, which is what I needed here in the end. So what you're able to do, since you are now going at it from the other side, our power wire, I like to kind of tuck between the TIP'em here and our battery, and then you can still get on over to one of the power studs here on our battery. Now for my ground, I was able to kind of bend my eyelet in a little different way, about 90 degrees, so I could just get the wiring tucked where I want it, and I'll be able to go right back on that factory ground lug there on the battery. All right, so we've got all of our cable routed. Now I'm going to try to show you the best I can the route that I go now that we've got our wiring ran. So off of our winch here, we are coming over to our frame rail, but we are basically immediately coming on this side of our body mount here. You can see the wiring comes down, curves around behind, and then we immediately go up into that engine bay area. Now I normally never pull the grill, but I pulled the grill so I can hopefully show you guys the routing a little bit nicer. But once we end up in the engine bay, again, you can see the winch wiring here. I did throw one little zip tie on this fender brace to hopefully kind of hold the wiring up out of the way. And now we've gone under this air duct and then under our wiring harness here. And then again, we've got the slot here in this battery box area. There's a larger slot here, there's a smaller slot here. I've got the wiring ran through the smaller slot here in the battery box up into our area next to the battery where those auxiliary switches are ran. And then last but not least, we've got our power wire going around the battery next to our TIP'em, and I've got that thing right back on the stud where it was. Now my battery little cover doesn't fit as nicely now that the wiring's coming from this side versus the other side, but again, we're still able to get that thing pulled over and covered up on our battery. Now our negative or ground wire, you can see it, we've got it looping back, tucked in between here, and then up nicely here on our ground stud. But the big thing that we were trying to take care of was the winch wiring coming up between the very moving motor and the fixed battery box. That thing had zip ties and clips holding it tightly to our dipstick tube, which made it just absolutely rub and cut in on this relatively sharp aluminum bracket edge right here. And like we showed, it was already wearing through the plastic covering in 2,000 miles. So give this thing any amount of miles and we are going to be having some issues with that power wire rubbing through where it shouldn't be. Well, we've got everything thrown back together now. We've got our grill back in, our air box back installed. Now, no, you didn't need to remove the grill like I said. I just hoped it maybe made it a little bit easier for you guys to see where I like running the winch wiring. The other cool benefit here is that I can actually get to my dipstick tube now without fighting and moving the wiring for the winch out of the way that shouldn't even have been there in the first place. Now, how soon would this have actually caused an issue? That's really hard to say. Could I have driven it 50,000 miles, 100,000 miles, 10,000 miles before that eventually rubbed through the wiring and caused an issue? I really don't know, and I can't really say. But the fact that it is rubbing on metal components directly bolted to the engine is not a good thing. Even the dipstick tube that was right there on that wiring harness, why? Why would you have that running that close or even connected to the dipstick? So again, all of these parts and pieces that you option on your vehicle, the winch, the decals, any of those things get put on after the assembly line at something that's called the Mopar Custom Shop. That is the vehicle being transported to a different building. Again, it is Mopar obviously, but those are the guys that are installing all of our side steps and different things, parts and pieces that the vehicle's not built with. So this winch was thrown on at that Mopar Custom Shop, and I'm absolutely sure those guys are following the guide where they are supposed to route the wiring, and they did it correctly. Every single one of those zip ties and clips were all clipped onto something that looked like it should have been there, but again, us off-roaders know that that is not going to be the real world. Again, we've got a metal bracket that is connected to the engine that's moving, that is rubbing directly on the power wire for the winch that's connected to the fixed body of the vehicle. That's not going to end well. So yes, this is talking about the Mopar option winch, but even you guys that have aftermarket winches, again, whether you've installed them or had someone else install them, go out to your vehicle, pop the hood, follow that wiring and see where it runs. I've just seen way too many really bad installs that have caused issues when Jeeps come into the shop. So take a little time here and go out to your Jeep and make sure that wiring is routed where it should be, not touching anything it shouldn't be, and not going to cause you issues while you're out on the street, out on the highway, or more importantly, out on the trail hours away from home. So guys, hopefully this was helpful for keeping your Jeep a little less smoky under the hood or fiery under the hood, one or the other. And guys, thanks for coming out into the garage with me today. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.